The man was arrested for breaking into an old ranger cabin during a snowstorm. No weapon, no stolen goods, just a dying fire and a single worn dog tag. When the judge saw the name on it, he stood up. His hands trembled. And what happened next changed the entire town, uncovered a war secret buried for 50 years, and forced everyone in that courtroom to ask, what do we owe the heroes we forgot? The wind howled like a wounded animal across the frozen Montana Valley, rattling through the trees and sweeping down into the ghosted shell of a once-used ranger station. Inside, flickering firelight cast shadows across the cracked wood floor, where an old man sat cross-legged, hunched forward, warming his hands over a makeshift hearth, made of a steel bucket and torn park maps. When the sheriff's deputy broke the door in, the man didn't run, didn't flinch, just looked up with tired, bloodshot eyes and said, "Sorry, I knocked. They cuffed him anyway. Breaking and entering, damage to federal property, unlawful use of resources." The booking log didn't care that it was 5 degrees below zero that night. Didn't ask if he had a place to go. What mattered was the statute. But when the judge opened the case file 2 days later, he paused. A name, barely legible from an old ID card in the evidence bag, had turned the blood in his veins to ice. Samuel Harlan, he whispered. A name that hadn't crossed his lips in 44 years, not since that night in Cambodia when a soldier dragged him through a firefight and disappeared into the jungle, presumed dead. But that soldier hadn't died. He just came back to a country that forgot him. And now, here he was, on trial for surviving a snowstorm the only way he knew how. Judge Raymond Holt sat alone in chambers, the file in front of him trembling under, his fingertips like a ghost trying to breathe. The name, the rank, the battalion, all of it matched. He remembered reading the after-action report, Operation Cinder Echo, a covert insertion deep behind enemy lines, the kind they denied ever happened. He remembered the photos of burned-out helicopters and body bags, the kind of horror that doesn't fade with medals or therapy. But one name stood out then, and now, Sergeant First Class Samuel Harlan. The man had been written off, not KIA, not MIA, just redacted, removed, gone, until now. But this wasn't a soldier in uniform sitting in his courtroom. This was a worn-out old man with frostbite scars and no fixed address being processed by a system that had no memory of his service. The weight of it sat heavy on Holt's chest because deep down, he knew exactly what this meant if this trial went forward as is. The court would be sentencing a man the country should have carried home on its shoulders. The name wasn't just familiar. It was sacred. And as the gavel neared the bench, the real question wasn't about guilt. It was whether Holt had the guts to let the past come crashing into the present. The courtroom was small. Just 2 rows of benches, a wooden rail, and a heater that whined more than it worked. Harlan stood at the defense table, wearing a thrift store coat with patches sewn over holes by hand. The prosecutor recited charges like a shopping list. Theft of public utilities, unauthorized entry into government property, endangerment due to open flame. The judge listened, stone-faced, until Harlan took the stand and answered a question no one expected. "Why that cabin?" "Because I knew no one was watching it," Harlan said simply. "Didn't mean to cause trouble. I was freezing." The judge leaned forward. "Where'd you learn to start a fire that safely with no equipment?" Harlan blinked. "You learn things when you're hiding from death in a jungle." The courtroom tensed. Holt's hand tightened around his pen. "What unit were you in?" Harlan hesitated. "Can't say much." Cinder Echo. Holt stood, quietly, slowly, like a man walking through a memory. "So it's true," he said. "You're the one who pulled me out that night." Harlan didn't smile, just nodded. Didn't think you made it? Gasps rippled through the room. The prosecutor fumbled his pen. The bailiff's eyes widened. The trial had just shifted from routine to sacred. This wasn't a case anymore. It was a reckoning. The next morning, word spread, not through headlines, but whispers, that the man they'd seen collecting cans behind the gas station was once a soldier who saved the town's own judge in a war the government pretended never happened. At the hearing, the courtroom was packed, not with press, but with people, real people. A school bus mechanic stood and said, "He fixed my rig when it broke down on Route 7. Wouldn't take a dime." A retired nurse said she saw him stop a fight outside the shelter without throwing a single punch. Just calm, commanding. The guy who assaulted me ran, like he knew better. One after another. They stood, farmers, teachers, the diner owner who said he left pie and soup on the bench behind his place every Friday, and it always disappeared, but the dish was always returned, clean. No one had realized the same man lived in the shadows of their kindness, never asking, never taking more than he needed. Until now. Holt watched it all, eyes heavy. This wasn't about laws anymore. This was about community, about how easy it is to forget people when you think they're no longer useful. But the truth was clear. This man had been serving them in silence for years. After a recess, the judge returned with something old, a letter, water-stained, the envelope brittle with age. "This was in the archive," he said. "I never opened it." It was addressed to him, Raymond Holt, 2nd LT, 1971. Written by a medic who didn't make it out. The letter described the operation, but more importantly, it detailed what Harlan did. He didn't just save one man. He covered an entire squad's retreat, took shrapnel to the leg, and still walked 14 clicks to an evac point dragging to wounded men. He told me he didn't want a medal, the medic wrote. Said medals don't buy groceries. Harlan hadn't known this letter still existed. Tears welled in his eyes, but he held them back. Judge Holt's hands shook as he finished reading. "This court owes you more than a verdict, Sergeant," he said. "We owe you a return." The gallery stood in silence, but in every listener's chest, something broke. The realization that justice is too often delayed not by corruption, but by forgetfulness. That good men get lost in the files of forgotten wars, and that healing sometimes comes not from rules, but from reading what we ignored for too long. But not everyone was convinced. The prosecutor stood, uneasy. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is still a legal proceeding. Our laws don't make exceptions for legacy or heroism. The facts remain." He broke in. He lit a fire. He could have caused a forest fire. The room shifted. Some nodded. Others stared in disbelief. The judge remained still. Then Harlan spoke. "He's right," he said. "I did break the law. I lit the fire. I just didn't want to die." The silence that followed wasn't of shame, it was of self-examination. How many in that room had driven past someone cold? How many had voted for budget cuts to shelters, while never wondering where those people went in December? This wasn't about right versus wrong. It was about survival versus bureaucracy. The judge leaned forward. What good is the law if it forgets to protect the people who bled to defend it? That's what the audience needs to feel, that law without compassion is cruelty wrapped in code. That when policy forgets people, it's the people who must remind it. Just as the gavel was about to fall, the courtroom doors creaked open once more. A uniformed figure stepped through, army green, full insignia, and a brass nameplate that shone under the lights. Colonel Damon Ellis, Veterans Affairs, he announced. "Apologies, Your Honor, but we need to speak on record." The judge allowed it. The colonel stepped forward and unrolled a document. Sergeant Harlan's name was part of a review triggered by declassified records from Operation Cinder Echo. What we found changed his file. He was never dishonorably discharged. He was listed as inactive pending due to administrative error. His benefits were never properly activated. Audible gasps filled the room. Furthermore, we've reassessed his service under the Veterans Valor Restoration Act. We are issuing full honors, retroactive to 1971, with back pay and full benefits. The colonel saluted. The judge rose. Harlan just sat, stunned. After 50 years, the system had finally come for him not to punish, but to restore. And for the audience, this was the heart punch. The realization that sometimes redemption doesn't come in a blaze. It comes quietly, through locked files, a knock on the door, and a voice saying, "We see you now." With the formalities concluded, Judge Holt returned to his bench and stared at the file that had started it all. Then he looked at the man who had saved his life. All charges against Sergeant First Class Samuel Harlan are dismissed. With prejudice, he declared, "This court formally apologizes on behalf of this state and this country for the decades of silence that followed your service." The gallery rose not because of orders, but because something inside them demanded it. A standing ovation for a man who never wanted one. As Harlan stood, the metal pinned on his chest shimmered beneath the cheap courthouse lights. And in that moment, every viewer understands justice isn't always a verdict. Sometimes it's recognition. Sometimes it's the act of saying, "We remember." And for anyone watching who knows someone forgotten, this is the call. Don't wait for ceremonies. Don't wait for perfect moments. Pick up the phone. Knock on the door. Say their name.